Good evening, everyone. And again, welcome to our webinar on the humanities. We are joined by two excellent speakers. Robert Townsend is Director of Humanities, Arts, and Culture Programs at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and co-director of the Humanities Indicators. Prior to the Academy, he spent 24 years at the American Historical Association as Director of Research and Publications. He is the author of one book and over 200 articles on various aspects of history and the humanities. We also have Tim Henderson. As Executive Director of Humanities Tennessee, Tim leads the organization's effort to foster community and civility throughout the state. He works with the board of directors and staff to connect humanities resources and perspective with challenges and community needs in Tennessee. Tim has been on the Humanities Tennessee staff since 1998. Serving as the Director of Digital Programs and Operations before taking on his current role in 2012. Born and raised in Nashville, he earned a BA with honors in English and philosophy from Union University and MA in English from Middle Tennessee State University and an MS in Information Science from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Welcome to both Robert Townsend and Tim Henderson. And we're going to begin with Robert Townsend.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. It's great to be here with you all. I will have a little presentation to share at the beginning just to kind of sketch some issues out for us to discuss, and I hope you'll find it interesting, useful, enlightening. When I give these talks to a more public audience, I usually find it useful to talk a little bit about how we define the humanities as a subject, and in part, because we did a survey of the public about 5 years ago, asking them sort of what they thought of the humanities. And we started by testing out a survey, as you can see here, of just asking the public just cold, what do you think the word humanities means? And you can see sort of generally the responses were the sorts of things you would expect. Human, although art, the head of research for the National Endowment for the Arts was very excited at how large the word art was in terms of people's responses. But if you look more closely at some of the smaller responses that we got, you'll see things like giving blood, donating to charity, and generally things that one would think of as more humanitarianism than humanities. And so in the end, when we did this survey, we realized that we would need to have to kind of sneak up on people with a definition of the humanities, starting by sort of walking them through a series of activities that a lot of the public engages with. And so for our own purposes at the Humanities Indicators project that I run, we've come up with a definition that really focuses much more broadly than I think for a lot of people who tend to focus on and think about the humanities as specific academic disciplines. We like to focus more broadly on things that the public engage with, well beyond the academy. So things like knowledge, skills, and activities. I won't read the whole thing because I generally don't like to put words up on screen. But to give you a sense of how we think very broadly about what the humanities are and how the public engages with them. And you can see, I hope this is a survey that we did in June of last year, building on that survey that we did back in 2019, to give you some sense of how many different ways that we see the public as engaging with the humanities. The largest area of engagement is reading a fiction book, at least among the people who engage often, although you can see watching shows with historical content is really the most popular form of engagement with the humanities, but it includes everything from, sort of reading different types of history, going out to museums and that sort of thing. In the most recent survey, we've added some arts things, which you can see are actually less popular than a lot of forms of engagement, with attending theater and dance performances down at the bottom among the least engaged with. And part of that, the purpose of this is to really get a sense of how often and in how many different ways the public engages with what we think of as the humanities broadly, to show that it really lives well beyond the academy in the way that most people tend to think. Unfortunately, part of the reason that there is so much anxiety and concern about the humanities these days is that the humanities have started to see a significant decline, especially in the number of bachelor's degrees. Although, as you can see, if you look at it from the late 90s up to about 2012, the number of humanities degrees was rising fairly steadily. It's really just since 2012 that the number of humanities degrees has started to fall, and it's fallen by about 30% sort of across the entire field of the humanities. And in the larger disciplines, so history, English, the languages, religion, and philosophy, like the older, more traditional disciplines, they've lost about 40% of their degrees. So more and then worse than you see here. Sorry. And as you can see in this sort of other take, we also include communication, which originally starts as rhetoric as an academic discipline as well. But it really gives you a sense of why you might be reading a lot of stories about anxiety about the state of the humanities. It's really almost entirely focused on this trend in bachelor's degrees. In comparison, you can see a couple of the other disciplines that we have encountered or that we're sort of in relationship to, especially the health and medical sciences and engineering and computer science, unsurprisingly. They were accounted for about 8.5% of the degrees that were being awarded in the late 90s. They're now up around 12, 13% today. And the humanities have kind of gone in a reverse direction in terms of their sort of share of degrees that you're seeing now. Although you'll notice in recent years, everything except computer science is starting to see some small decline, but the humanities are really suffering the worst, which is why we have all these different articles coming out recently talking about how desperate and dire the situation is for the humanities broadly and different disciplines in particular. So looking specifically into the trend in degrees in Tennessee, you can see that the humanities have followed very much the same pattern in terms of a decline in degrees, with the humanities degrees down about 32%, started to fall, sort of reached their peak in 2013 and have been falling ever since. And this is despite the fact that the number of degrees being awarded in Tennessee actually continued to go up through many of these years. So the share of humanities degrees, which peaked at around 15% around 2005 in Tennessee, the degrees being awarded in Tennessee have now fallen to about 8.5% of the degrees being awarded in relative terms. So that's actually a pretty big difference, although it's very in line with the national average that we've seen. One of the reasons that I think this is happening is that there's been just a huge drop off in the share of kids who are reading for pleasure. Most of the humanities disciplines and the way we studied them in college is very focused on still reading at least some substantive amount of text. And as you can see, back when I graduated from high school in 1984, 70% of 13-year-olds said they were reading it at least once a week. About 70% of them said that they were reading that often. That's now fallen to about 36%. And you can see the drop off has become much more precipitous just since around 2000. So a big sort of smartphone deterioration in reading habits that I think is creating a significant headwind for the field from that perspective. But then the other big issue is really just people's perceptions of what the value of a humanities degree is. We start with a challenge just in the fact that even humanities alumni tend not to see a close relationship between the jobs that they have now and the degrees that they earned back when they were in college. So only about 26% as of 2023 saw a close relationship between their jobs and their degrees. And I think that perception fits with or sort of feeds into a larger perception, what is often called the barista myth, which I find incredibly frustrating when I talk to journalists who, will always want to come back to this, oh, but don't they all end up as baristas? And which is absolutely not the case. In reality, we find humanities majors spread across every occupation, doing a vast number of things and doing quite well in most areas. So when we look at the distribution of where people with a humanities degree, and just a humanities degree, so this is just a bachelor's degree, not including about 40% go on it and earn another degree in some other subject, which often kind of gets them into a more specific occupation. But when you look broadly at this, you can see humanities majors are very widely distributed across the various occupational categories, which speaks to, I think, broadly, the fact that the humanities, sort of study in the humanities, sets students up to do a lot of different things. We actually teach a wide range of different skills, and I think that's actually a part of the power of study in the humanities that I've been trying to encourage more faculty to be more sort of open and speak more broadly about how that actually works. When we look specifically at Tennessee, you can see that the humanities graduates look pretty similar to all college graduates in terms of their overall outcomes, although they're slightly overrepresented in areas like education, service and sales being kind of the two big ones. But if you look down at the bottom, you can see like in a couple of the major job categories, like humanities graduates are a huge percentage of the people who are in library museum jobs, for instance. About 33% of the college graduates in those jobs came from the humanities. And similarly, in the legal professions, a quarter of the people who are in legal professions started as with bachelor's degrees in the humanities among the people that are living in Tennessee. It's relatively high among kind of the national averages, but not too far off. And it does speak to how important the humanities are to, especially to some sort of valuable professions, I think, in the field. When I give these talks, I often also like to just point out, because I think there's a perception that humanities majors are doing considerably worse than other graduates in terms of their earnings. And here, looking again just at those people who only have a bachelor's degree, so not including the folks with an advanced degree who actually earn considerably, about a 10 to 15% more after getting the degree. You can see the humanities are pretty close to the dotted line, which is the average for all college graduates. And they're kind of towards the middle in terms of earnings, sort of median earnings at the present time. Too often, though, we end up getting compared to engineers. And I get in arguments with people who constantly want to say, well, don't we just need more engineers because that's where all the money is? And as I keep pointing out to people, like the engineers are the outliers. And in many cases, those of us who studied the humanities did so precisely because we didn't want to get into something like engineering. And so it does, I think, speak to an imbalance in the way we tend to think about sort of what the value outcomes are of a college degree. And really, the engineers are outliers for every other college graduate as well. And so, as I point out to some people, it's like we're not saying we should eliminate the health and medical science degrees and the business degrees just because they're earning so much less than engineers. And yet, when I talk to journalists, they often want to just make a direct comparison between the humanities degrees and the engineering degrees. To me, the real comparison should be to people who haven't earned a college degree at all. And as you can see, the humanities majors, college graduates are earning about 36% more per year than people with just a high school diploma. So the majority of people in the population. So there is a clear return on investment on earning a degree in the humanities, and we just end up getting in a false comparison to engineering rather than to what it would be if they hadn't earned a degree. And so I think that's a positive piece of the story that we can tell. As you can see in Tennessee specifically, the humanities grads are actually doing slightly better than the behavioral and social science majors. And, again, slightly below the natural sciences and business majors and well below the engineering majors, which I don't think a lot of people who study the humanities, the engineering is a real sort of alternative for them. But so again, I think the story in Tennessee is very much like what we see in the nation in terms of job outcomes for the humanities. Looking more broadly at the national sort of picture, I don't have specific numbers for Tennessee, but we did this survey with Gallup back in 2019 about how college graduates feel about their jobs. And as you can see, college graduates from the humanities look very much like college graduates from every other field in terms of their satisfaction with different aspects of their job. When we ask about how they felt about their lives generally, 90% of them said they were quite satisfied with their lives on kind of a ladder of success. So again, not that much in terms of a difference in terms of the humanities versus all degrees. So I do think, one of the questions that comes up quite often is like, oh, well, don't humanities majors end up worse? They simply don't. Across metrics that are both sort of real economic and sort of the intangibles of life, the humanities majors are doing just fine across most of these metrics. One of the challenges, though, and one of the things that I've been trying to push faculty to do a better job of talking about, is to talk more about the skills that students are developing while they're in the classroom. And I think, again, and these are very much skills that one develops just by engaging with the humanities. Among those folks who are engaging with them in the earlier survey that we did, or the broader survey that we did of the public. And here's a survey of employers that ask them to think about, like, what skills do they consider very important. And when you look at this list of skills, communicating, critical thinking, finding and using information, and decision making, like, those are skills that are really being developed in the course of a good humanities education. I think too often the humanities faculty simply fail to tell students that they are actually learning skills in addition to the content. So too many kids I talk to will tell me, oh, I took a class in 19th century German intellectual history or whatever, and they can tell me in detail the content of the class, but they have absolutely no idea that they're developing these skills. So I sometimes give this talk at alumni evenings, and after listening to some humanities alumni describe these amazing jobs they're in, um, they'll hear my talk, then they'll come up to me afterwards and say, I never really thought about the skills that I was getting. And so I do spend a lot of time trying to convince people to do, or faculty especially, but then also now I'm trying to talk more to students, something to get them to think more about what they're doing in the course of studying and engaging with the humanities. I think this is true not just of the students who are studying it, but of anybody who engages with the humanities, that you're really developing communication skills, information organizing skills, skills about thinking about how information actually is sort of put together, used, and where to sort of look at it critically. And I think those are the sorts of skills that we need to do a better job of articulating to students if we're faculty, and to sort of younger people more broadly, so that they think about how these different aspects of what they engagement with the humanities brings to somebody. So I think there's a very positive story to be told there. So sort of thinking more generally about kind of what the future holds for the humanities, I do worry that the headwinds of reading is likely to create a kind of continued problem for the humanities moving forward. I think the question about AI, though, since that comes up in a lot of the conversations I have with folks, is sort of like, what does AI do to the humanities? I do feel like there's a lot of aspects of the kind of what AI presents that is actually sort of speaks to the importance of having a good humanities education, because it does, I think, teach people to think both about what good language means, why an issue should be sort of driven home, or how to actually sort of deliver a message and do so in a forceful way, in a way that speaks to other human beings, and also just how to think critically about information that's coming out of AI. And so from that perspective, I do feel like AI actually presents more of an opportunity than a risk for the humanities, certainly in comparison to like computer science majors, who actually, their work can actually be easily replicated by a lot of what these emerging AI technologies can do. So I'm somewhat hopeful, somewhat positive about where this might take us as we look forward. And so I see it as a sunrise, not a sunset on the field as we go forward. So with that, I will stop and turn it over to Tim.
Oh, thank you so much, Robert. That was really fascinating. I know I have some questions for you, but we're going to turn it over to Tim Henderson of Humanities Tennessee.
Yeah, thank you, Meryl, and thank you, Robert, for that. Very heartening and a really enlightening perspective. So I'm going to see now if I can share and put just a few slides up here. Hopefully you'll see. Can tell me if you see that now. Is that good?
Nope.
No. Okay. Share. Oh, I see it now.
Let's get
There we go.
There we go.
Now you're coming
Okay.
on board.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we rehearsed this actually, so apologies. Oh yeah, I really appreciate that perspective, Robert. Thank you so much. And again, I want to introduce myself as a representative of a public humanities organization specifically, and a lot of what I will talk briefly about this evening is the work that we do as a public humanities institution, what the public humanities try to do to employ the humanities around Tennessee, and even a little bit about the national picture as part of a broader membership of state and jurisdictional humanities councils that are everywhere. So I will try to do that in the context of how we came to be the organization that we are, what our mission and what our charge is as a public humanities programming institution, and why we think this work really does matter now as much or maybe even more than ever before. So what we hope almost philosophically to accomplish by doing public humanities work. So just a bit there, our mission statement and our value statement. The value statement we created after some really deep reflection just a few short years ago to help guide our work, and those values have proven really important to us in a lot of decision-making instances, especially over the past couple of years. And that is
Tim,
my,
Tim, I
yes.
wanted to just interrupt. Excuse me, please. Being asked, the type's a little small. Could you put your presentation in presentation view? Maybe that would
Oh, I
help.
thought I had. Yes, of course. Yeah. Sorry. Is that
No
better?
worries. There you go. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I had done that, and apologies for
Yeah,
that.
I
So
wasn't paying
yeah,
attention
it
either,
is
so thank
quite small, and hopefully now it's legible. So apologies again for the technical issues. So yeah, just to make mention of these, what we think of as humanities adjacent or humanistic values of shared knowledge, empowerment, civility, community, and equity. Those still really guide a lot of our decision making as a nonprofit business, but also as a humanities programmer. And we try to hearken to those as much as possible. So I thought really might be good to start with something I was calling cultural agencies and local entities as part of the Great Society in response to the increased national technical and technological investments, or where did Humanities Tennessee come from? And so we'll just sort of start with the founding legislation. This is the National Foundation on the Arts and Humanities Act of 1965, which really established the National Endowments for Arts and Humanities. And Robert, you've probably seen this legislation many, many times, but there are a few of these clauses that we find really quite poetical and really apropos, even today, 50 years after this legislation was enacted. And so part of the rationale for creating these cultural endowments was the findings of Congress and the declarations that one, the arts and the humanities belong to all the people of the United States. And this is a really important one for us, and it's one of the reasons that we claim value in public support of the humanities and the arts. It is, as we sort of imagine it, it's one of the few ways we have as people to claim our stories and to own our culture and our history and our art. It is our buy-in to that. And without that public investment, it can quite easily often be commodified and commercialized, and we sort of stop owning it. And this is a really important finding for us, and this rationale still speaks to us. Number two is that the encouragement and support of national progress and scholarship in the humanities and the arts is an appropriate matter of concern for the federal government. So the legislation makes the case that yes, it's a private interest, but it's also a matter of concern for the federal government. The nation has an interest and a stake in this. Number three, and these start to get really prescient today in the current climate, especially. An advanced civilization must not limit its efforts to science and technology alone in order to achieve a better understanding of the past, a better analysis of the present, and a better view of the future. So in some sense, the cultural endowments were founded as a sort of response to the national founding of the National Science Foundation and the space race, if you will, and sort of going all in on science and tech, and a sort of pumping the brakes to remind us that again, we're humans ultimately, and we don't want to lose track of that. And then this is not the final finding in this section, but we'll stop here because this is one of the ones we often pause on, and that is the fourth declaration, which is that democracy demands wisdom and vision in its citizens. And it must therefore foster and support a form of education and access to the arts and the humanities designed to make people of all backgrounds masters of their technology and not its unthinking servants. And while I think we would do well to write that today, and we just keep that in one of our eyes, I think we'll talk about this notion as we go through some of the work that Humanities Tennessee is starting to do, especially in our Shared Futures Lab, which is a fairly new initiative for us. But um, one of the ways we're encompassing this in our work or trying to these days is by keeping some of our longstanding his focus on history and work that supports public history work by also noting that history is really part of a continuum and that we're really looking toward the future. So we just wanted to start with that. And again, from that last finding that we noted, that this pervasive myth that the STEM skills are really all that matter. We hear this sort of rhetoric a lot from legislators too, and from appropriators. And Robert just spent a moment making a very strong case for this bullet point right here, which is that we know, as we see from this sort of web of skills here that are deemed essential in modern economies, that employers actively seek these sorts of skills that are honed by humanities education, those of collaboration and communication, ethical reasoning, and especially critical thinking, and which is really at the heart of the humanities. So to start to make the case for what we do and why, we just really want to note that in Tennessee, as all over the nation, the humanities aren't really an abstract concept. They're a measurable force for community cohesion, educational success, and even economic growth. I think the cultural nonprofit sector in Tennessee alone is nearly $1.5 billion a year. So the arts and culture sector is also an economic force. But from regional events like the Southern Festival of Books, which we do every year, to local community-centered history projects, which we've supported for half a century, the humanities are the vehicle through which we can build a shared and prosperous future. So given that, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the context in which we operate, and that is being one of 56 state and jurisdictional humanities councils. And a couple of bullets here that would just let you see something about the impact that these state humanities councils have in their jurisdictions all over the country. There are 56 of them. Every state, territory, and the District of Columbia has a state or jurisdictional humanities council. We were formed in the starting around the early to mid 1970s, and really it was to bring federal dollars back to a much more local level to engage our state in the humanities. And that's been our charge and our charter ever since we were established in 1973. We still stay true to that. We began as entirely a regranting organization. So we took federal dollars and regranted them out to organizations doing, and very often higher ed institutions doing humanities programmings for the public. We now have a very small amount of our funding in our most recent granting year going to regrants. And with termination of federal funding, our regranting program has stopped entirely. So you can imagine the impact of that as it's happened in all of the councils with the termination of NEH grants to support the councils as they have been for 50 plus years. That impact on community organizations, especially small and rural ones, has been devastating, and that outlook, while we're hopeful, at the moment it feels really dire, and we'll talk just briefly a little bit more about that too. But again, just a sense of the scope of the kinds of programs that the state humanities councils do nationwide before we dig into what Humanities Tennessee has been doing here. You can see that these programs really run the gamut, and they go from just sort of traditional public humanities programs to even applied humanities, and really looking for ways to make humanistic findings and methods and approaches and values applicable and relevant into community life. So, a couple of quotations here that are dear to me and that have, at least philosophically, guided some of what Humanities Tennessee has done in the past few years. One is from Jane Jacobs's last book, Dark Age Ahead, and I don't want to get too gloomy, but this is something that's on our mind a lot these days. And what Jacob says is that many subtractions combine to erase a previous way of life, and everything starts to change as a richer past converts to a meager present and an alien future. So, as we really stop thinking about the past in deep ways and sort of forget what we are forgetting, we lose our sight heading into the future, and that seems like a very precarious position to be in, and we're taking that seriously. One other is from Frederick Douglass's great speech, What to the Slave is the Fourth of July. He says, we have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. So again, a lot of the work that Humanities Tennessee has done and that the state councils have done for half a century across the country has had us focus on local community and public history. But again, we want always to make sure that that is relevant to the present and also the way that we're planning together our futures. So that sort of gets us to Humanities Tennessee. I mean, how does HT focus itself and try to realize its mission as a public humanities programming institution? We do it largely through a couple of broad areas. One is literary arts, and that often comes down to providing, or a focus, sort of philosophical focus on providing broad access to really expansive narratives. All the people of Tennessee, we would say, deserve to have their stories preserved, interpreted, and made accessible. So that is what drives one set of our programs and programming focus. And the other is something we're learning to do is honing our work in supporting history, as I mentioned a minute ago, really through the lens of focusing on the present and on the future. And that's being done largely through our new initiative called the Shared Futures Lab. But some of what we've been doing in the past few years in our statewide programs, the Southern Festival of Books, some of you may know that program. It's been around for 37 years this year. We just wrapped our 37th annual in Nashville just a couple of weeks ago. We have a relatively new podcast, roughly a year or so old, called Humanities in Action, that really gets at what can be made relevant about doing public humanities work in institutions all over the state. So if you aren't familiar with that podcast, I would encourage you to find that's pretty easy to find if you just search Humanities in Action and Humanities Tennessee. Chapter16.org is our daily online literary publication, and we farm that content out, which is all, hesitate to call it content. It's literary reviews, it's author interviews, it's features, original essays, poetry, all of all of the pieces that reflect something about the literary life of the state. We share that material with major newspapers all over the state. We give that to them to run in their papers, so that creates a really large audience for that content and tries to cohere that literary and reader and writer community around Tennessee. Student Reader Day, which brings authors into schools all over the state. We also have mechanisms for providing those authors books to the students, and then the students get to spend a day talking to authors, and they'll come visit entire student bodies, also individual classrooms. We also make Student Reader Day part of our Southern Festival of Books. So we will bus in anywhere from 500 to 700 public school students to come and meet with a couple of authors over the course of a day, get copies of those books, and have an opportunity to interact with writers. And that's a really meaningful opportunity for a lot of those students. One of our newer programs is the Tennessee Book Award. So we're in the second year now of recognizing in 3 categories the best work each year by a Tennessee writer. That was, believe it or not a program that existed in the state, and we were proud to work with our new partners on that. And I've mentioned our re-grant program, which is currently on a pause. We can circle back to why and what we hope the future of that could be eventually. But that program has been a very important part of what Humanities Tennessee has been and has done, and really speaks to the value of working together. It is through those sorts of collaborations. So we're not simply writing checks as a grantor. We really are working very closely with our grantees to craft relevant and meaningful humanities projects all over the state. We continue to support scholarships to the Tennessee Association of Museums annual conference every year, which is a very big professional development opportunity, often to small and rural museums who otherwise cannot take part, and and a really lifelong focus on local and community history. And just to highlight a couple of those here, you see this is an image from, these are a couple of images from some of our most recent public programs. This one is from the Moore Family Century Farm. Uh, this was uh, this was really testimonies of Black-owned farms and gardens in Tennessee. This came through a grant project that we funded a couple of years ago. It was a pilot project initiative to preserve one of the few remaining Black-owned farms in Tennessee. In October 2025, the project team unveiled a permanent exhibit and a tour of the 200-acre Moore family farm in West Tennessee. It featured outdoor interpretive panels along a heritage trail that really are meant to inform and inspire and instruct the next generation of Black and Indigenous landowners, as well as the consumers of those products and produce. So a really important testament to the creativity of grantees. And this is an image from our Southern Festival of Books. Again, it's one of the oldest literary festivals in the country. We bring in about 200 authors every year to Nashville. Thousands of people come every year to visit us in downtown Nashville every October. It's free, completely free to everyone who comes, every part of the festival, and includes author panels, performance stages, live music, family area, food trucks, publishers, and really just everything related to that we can think of related to literary life in the state and the region. So, again, what's driving this work is a focus on these humanities values and girding those to help strengthen our communities and hopefully to help foster increased civility around the state. Um, I'd want to sort of close with what I hope doesn't come off as overly pessimistic, but just a bit of a call to action and a note about the sort of dire position that these these really important public humanities institutions are in right now. So I won't go through this entire timeline, but we are in the midst of a kind of federal funding crisis, as many institutions are, and communities are around the nation. And one of the ways this has hit the public humanities world is the immediate cessation of grant funding to the state councils, which we have used as operating support as it was devised for a half a century plus. And this is a sort of sweeping and fairly detailed look at how that has got us to where we are today. Now, of course, we're in the midst of a government shutdown, and so there doesn't seem to be very much going on. We remain hopeful that support for the state humanities councils will come back at some point. But I think across the country, the councils see the crucial need to move away from over-reliance on especially federal public support and to find new means of supporting and continuing the really important work that the councils have been doing for 50 plus years. So something about the depth of this crisis, in 2024, before the grants were cut, we were serving, we meaning that body of state and humanity and jurisdictional councils, every state and territory in the nation, re-granting to every congressional district in the nation, and doing very important programming and reaching upwards of nearly 43 million people a year through these public programs. Since the 1st of April, you can see the sort of hit to these numbers and to this effectiveness that we've taken. 42% of all council programs have either canceled or been greatly reduced or paused. 65% of our grant programs for local organizations have been canceled. So again, a big part of what councils were doing with federal funding was re-granting that on the ground to local institutions to do public humanities work. That's crucial. And there isn't another entity who can step in at that level to help fill that gap. And so it feels important and it feels like a great loss. So what can we do? We want to remind ourselves always the humanities aren't dying, but they're changing. And they're really vital to our economy, to our education, and ultimately to civic life. And our sort of call to action is more or less threefold. What can you do? You can support humanities work. You can advocate, write, and call legislators, appropriators, state, local, even federal funding for public humanities organizations. In our mind, one of the most important ways to help is to engage, get involved in your humanities council's work and in the state of Tennessee. If you're a Tennessean and you don't know Humanities Tennessee, we encourage you to reach out to us and let's let you know what we're doing, and hopefully we're doing or supporting something close to you that you can go take part in. Participate in local history projects, book clubs, the civic discussions, go to humanities programs and take part. And finally, invest just deeply by encouraging others to do the same, involve your communities, involve your networks, and let's just really all own our stories and our culture and our arts, um, and not take those for granted. And that's it. I would thank you all for the opportunity, and again look forward to a conversation.
Fantastic. Truly, both of you, that's wonderful. Um, if anyone has a question, feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand either literally or virtually with the device at the bottom of your screen. I don't see any questions yet, but I did want to ask both of you. I've had several friends of mine who are teachers, and you've referred to reading difficulties, that they have students who cannot read anything in long form. So does that ring true to you? And what do you think the implications of that are? And I'd like to hear both of you answer that question, if you don't mind.
Tim, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak a little bit about that. I'll say I have two immediate thoughts about that, Marilyn. One is I am always reminded of a talk that I heard Danielle Allen give a few years ago. And if you don't know her, I encourage you to look her up. She's a super fan, and a real constitutional scholar and political scholar, but a great humanist, and a truly a great communicator about the value of the humanities. And she was speaking to the entire world of the state humanities councils in a convening, national convening just a few years ago, and was talking about national sort of reading trends, or the lack of reading as it's trending these days, and just the decreased literacy in terms of reading long form. And the challenge to the humanities councils, many of whom live and work in this literary arts world, we all are, not all of us, but many of us are doing book festivals, reading groups, discussion groups, and that sort of thing around the written word, all of which we still think is crucial and very important. But her challenge was, how would you promote and employ the humanities if you didn't use books?
Mm.
What could we imagine doing to really bring the humanities to our communities without the written word? And that's a challenge we've thought a lot about. Don't We haven't cracked that nut, and we continue to invest a lot in book related and literary programs. But the challenge is real, and I don't know the real answer to that. But the other thing that immediately comes to mind is, again, hearkening back to that sort of over reliance on technology that the Humanities Act encouraged us to be diligent about. We do think there's a risk that as artificial intelligence is increasingly easy to access and utilize, that our own critical thinking skills get a bit rusty, right? And so it's really important that we employ those critical thinking skills. reading and just imagining itself helps us do that. And so we would just really say, make sure whether you're reading long form or not, make sure that you're finding ways to employ those critical thinking skills. It's just that long form reading, it comes with that baked in, I think, often. If you're engaging long material, you are going to use those critical thinking skills. And so that sort of exercise feels crucial.
Robert, do you have something to add to
Yeah,
that?
I will just, yeah, I'll just note, we've been doing focus groups with high school age kids recently, and we've found that this reading problem is actually really difficult for a lot of them, even to imagine studying the humanities. They're very honest about the fact that they see math and science as something that they find fairly easy, just because it's very simple and direct in terms of thinking through these things, and they just struggle. And they're very honest about the challenge of trying to maintain the attention span that's necessary to sort of spend time reading and sort of developing a sort of a larger consciousness about the narrative that they're going through. And so it has been kind of shocking to me, as you can probably tell by the background that I live in here. For me, words are and reading is just, fundamental. And to have found so many young people who are really struggling with it at a fundamental level, that where there's clearly literacy, but the ability to actually engage with long form text is just something that they're not very good at. And so there have been some good projects lately aimed at trying to get introductory students to engage with text in introductory classes in ways that will actually help them to try and energize them, to excite them, instill a little passion about sort of what happens when you engage with text and discover something really new and interesting that you've never encountered before. And I think that's probably the best that we can do in terms of trying to get students to just be more excited about what one can get out of reading, because it's certainly not happening right now for a wide variety of reasons that I think will be difficult for us to change.
Thank you. We do have a few questions now. I'm going to do with the ones that are on screen. Susan Morrissey, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Well, I just wanted to say, I think the Southern Festival of Books sounds like a lot of fun, but as far as I know, it's entirely in Nashville. And so I live in Memphis and I honestly hate that drive. And I'm just wondering if you could somehow take it on the road or pieces of it or make it available virtually, I guess you call it.
Yeah, thank you.
That's my free suggestion.
Mhm.
I love it, Susan. Thank you. I could probably talk 45 minutes about that. So I appreciate that comment and the suggestion itself. This, in some circles, this is a sensitive part of our history to bring up. We did actually take the Southern Festival of Books to Memphis for 2 years in the early aughts, and we found it just actually unworkable to be staff sort of centered and living in Nashville and then doing the festival in Memphis. But it was quite well received in Memphis. It's a wonderful readerly community in Memphis, Tennessee. That said, I mean, the idea of taking it on the road while taking the entire festival on the road obviously is not a thing we have capacity to do. The idea of piggybacking off of what we've learned to do from the festival and doing similar events and programs in other parts of the state is something that we're seriously considering and looking to increase our capacity to do. So, would like to stay in touch with you about that, and I hope that we'll see you at some Memphis events soon. So, yeah, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Debbie Gould, who's president of the League of Women Voters of Tennessee, by the way.
Hi. So I appreciate your comments, and I'm really curious. I've spent some time talking to people in the pre-K through 12 public school environment, and they have a lot of concerns about the limitations, shall we call it the book banning that goes on, and the limitations about access to a wide range of viewpoints. And I wonder if both of you could speak about how the pressures of limiting access, how that impacts how you figure out your programming, or if it does.
Robert, I don't know if you want to address that first. I'm happy to, because this is something we think an awful lot about, and especially as programmers of a decades-long book festival that brings hundreds of authors every year. That means we're bringing hundreds of titles to the public and investing a great deal of resources in providing that access. Um, so it's something we think a lot about. I have all kinds of thoughts about that. I don't have big final answers, obviously, but I can talk about, to your question directly, how we approach it as a programmer. And I would say that one of the most immediate things that comes to mind is that we have a long history of not, I wouldn't even put it as trying to thread a needle. It's simply retaining our focus on, again, those values as a public humanities programming institution. We feel we have an obligation, and especially one that's been recipient of a good amount of public funding for decades. We have an obligation to serve everyone in Tennessee, not some of Tennessee, but everyone. And part of what that challenge means to us is, again, as I alluded to in part of the presentation earlier, that means as much as we can, seeing that there is preservation and accessibility to all of our stories. So we try to, where we need to, depoliticize that not make that a political stance. That's simply a humanistic stance. That is a result of relying on a humanities-based value that we have. That there's dignity and value in all of these stories, and all of them together give us a more complete picture of this sort of human experience. That's what we're about, and that's what we're bound to do. So again, we're not provocateurs. We're not trying to push boundaries, but we are trying to stay true to that value and to that mission of seeing that there is a really expansive wealth of stories that we're preserving and making sure that there's access to. I'm also a librarian and information scientist by training. So I have that sort of in my heart too, that it matters that there's access, right, to these stories and that there's preservation. I mean, we all know the warnings of Alexandria and what happens when, and again, hearkening back to Jane Jacobs, what we lose when we don't even know what we've lost. So when we continue to limit access to our narratives, we are always losing something when we do that. And we want to be about preserving that and making it relevant and accessible.
I mean, for me, I'm working on a project now called Democracy, Arts, and Cultural Spaces, and it's bringing together everybody, people from institutions ranging from the performing arts to museums to public libraries. And one of the interesting things that's come out of this is just how far ahead the public libraries are in terms of rethinking their relationship to the public that they serve and the communities they serve. And on the question of, and just in the way that they have completely kind of redefined how many, sort of expanded the range of different activities that they engage with, that they've hired social workers to help develop new types of relationships. They've changed the buildings in ways that actually make them more open, engaging, and multi-use. And so it's funny when the issue of book banning came up at a meeting we had just recently. So, I mean, all these other institutions are looking at the public libraries as like, my God, you people are really doing everything right. We need to be imitating what you're doing. And when the question of book banning came in, the public librarians that were in the room just kind of waved their hands at us and said, look, we don't believe in banning books. It's fundamental to what we engage in. And so we are going to push back no matter how hard the response is in most cases. And so like their professional values, I think, again, are sort of serving the public in ways that are so fundamental that all these other cultural institutions are looking at them as leaders now in this project that I'm working on. And I think they we could learn a lot from them just in terms of how they are sort of both sort of drawing in the community and then responding to some of these challenges that I think they're facing as a result of the current political situation. So I actually think they're probably better models than most in terms of how we could respond to some of these things.
I love that, Robert. I could just, that reminded me of something, and I appreciate that comment. And that is, and I don't want to overly politicize the question because often you'll hear to point out how sensitive this can be right now. You'll hear folks say this isn't about book banning, right? You'll hear that sort of language, right, in defense of limited access to narratives, certain narratives. It's not book banning, right? It's not censorship. And so the fact that we're wanting not to call it that means something. That seems to be saying something about what we're doing here. Um, all of this too, to me, there's a scary implication in that we're devaluing, to some degree, we're devaluing expertise when we do that because librarians are experts, right? We have experts who build collections. They're trained to do that. They're trained to survey community needs and respond to that and build collections that are responsive to their communities. And there is a kind of underlying note that we don't trust experts when we say they don't know how to build collections. And again, not saying that to be provocative or political, but that to me is a kind of flag. Not that experts are always right, but just that's a thing I want to sort of monitor in one eye. That what do we think about the whole notion of expertise in this day and age? And again, this is where critical thinking is crucial. We're talking about these humanities skills, and I think that gives us, when we exercise those skills, it gives us the capacity to know which experts to trust and when and how.
Great. In the interest of time, because we do have a few questions, I'm going to arbitrarily just ask one or the other of you. But if you're burning to make a comment, don't feel like you can't. So Robert, I'm going to give this question to you. How would you contrast what's going on in the humanities in the US versus outside of the US?
It's interesting. In Europe, we're seeing trends that are very similar to what we're seeing in the US in terms of sort of degrees declining, so some funding being sort of withdrawn or cut back for sort of the general, although the funding levels in Europe are much, much higher. But in places like Asia, we're actually seeing a return to the humanities in a lot of ways, as a lot of those countries where their training had gone so heavily towards technical training, I think they've realized that it's creating sort of workers who are just too narrow, lack creativity that one develops in the course of humanities study. And so I spent a fair amount of time monitoring kind of news coverage from around the world, and I've been quite struck that in India and in China, there's a lot of talk about how they're actually trying to encourage students and increase the number of humanities classes that are being taught, and trying to get more students who are even in technical subjects to take some classes in the arts and the humanities, just to try and expand their minds and expand their ability to think creatively, and to actually engage and be able to communicate in fundamental, in really critical ways as well. So it's a kind of a tale of kind of two continents, as far as I can tell, in terms of how the humanities are developing overseas.
Thank you. Tim, what role do you think standardized testing plays in the decline of reading fluency?
I would feel really comfortable answering that if I were an educator. I mean, I have my own hunches about that. I think and as a parent of kids in school right now, I think about standardized tests, and as many parents do, and community members who are around schools. I you often hear concerns about teaching to tests, teaching to the test, and that, and I understand that. I think again, um, as it applies to increasing reading fluency, which is something that, in my house, we want to be all about. I mean, we've been doing that since birth. But I think, reading critically is, in my mind, very closely akin to thinking critically. That skill is sharpened when we learn to read critically. And I mean, I have a degree in literature too, and so I spent a lot of time learning to read critically and write critically. So I felt like that doesn't, it's not going to give you the answer, uh, having that skill, but it will help you reason to an answer every time. And so I think standardized tests, I mean, I guess one of the concerns there is that you run the risk of not sharpening critical thinking skills, which would, I think, lead to greater reading fluency. Again, not being an educator, that is for what it's worth, sort of almost an opinion. But I mean, that has been my experience in my life and in my household. But if others have thoughts, I'd be really curious to hear.
Robert, did you want to add anything to that?
My son was an English major. I walk the talk, and he had wanted to teach English, and then he got into the practicum and actually had an experience of trying to teach, and he discovered how limited his ability was to teach the way he wanted to try and engage the students using sort of materials that they would find interesting and engaging because of the tests. And so he ended up leaving the teaching profession and becoming a counselor in the school systems instead. And so it did, to me, I've seen a tangible example of some of the problems of the rigor and the imposition that those tests impose on people in a tangible way.
Interesting. Well, here's our last question, and feel free to both answer. Well, Robert, why don't we start with you? I'm just going to read this. Even though there are non-humanity careers that have a higher earning potential, as you shared with us, than a humanity career, how has being exposed to humanity courses during undergraduate time helped them to be better in their chosen careers? I think you alluded to that a little bit, but could you expand a bit?
Yeah. No, I think that's very, I mean, partially, I think one of the challenges is that young people they develop a wide range of skills, that can include different types of communication, different types of information literacy, sort of different research skills. And I think one of the challenges that we see for humanities majors when they come out is they often move through 2 or 3 different jobs before they get into what will become their career. And I think in my experience from talking to a lot of them and listening to a lot of alumni talks is that part of the challenge is they're trying to figure out which of those skills they actually like, which they actually want to use and which they can deploy. And so really the challenge with the humanities is that it opens up so many opportunities that it often takes a little bit more time to actually work these things, to actually get into the career that will ultimately sort of take them to where their ultimate success will be. And it often helps them then move up in terms of their careers as well, because of these communication skills and these organizational and research skills. Like those are skills that actually help you get into management positions. And so at the national level, we find that humanities majors are overrepresented in management jobs. Again, because I think they've developed this range of skills that are actually very useful to a manager like me. The sorts of skills that I'm using every day are things that I definitely honed while I was studying the humanities. And so I do think that it's almost that it's too many different opportunities. But once you actually figure out which of them you like to use and where they can take you anywhere. And so it's both a blessing and a curse at a certain level in terms of what it does for you. So it's I don't know. I think very highly of it, needless to say. So thank you.
Tim, what do you have to add to that?
Just amen. I mean, I think Robert put it exactly right. In fact, I just was immediately thought of one of his graphs earlier in the presentation when you're seeing the sort of the difference between the expectation of some of those humanities centered or at least strengthened critical thinking and communicative skills versus what the reality of it is when folks are when they're employed and on the job. When we strengthen those skills, critical thinking, communicating, ethical reasoning, we want to believe, rise up on the merits, I think, and just be better at what you're doing, whether that's in the workplace or frankly, wherever you are in your life. It's that sort of what we used to maybe call enlightenment, can go a long way toward a really fulfilling life. And so again, just amen to that. I also am just reminded to go back to the legislative language. I mean, the Congress believed that democracy itself demands wisdom and vision in its people. And so, when you're learning information sort of hierarchy, that rubric has wisdom at the top of even knowledge, right? It is the sort of ultimate attainment. And so, we may achieve artificial intelligence. I don't know about artificial wisdom. I mean, maybe that's in the deck somewhere, but I think this feels to me uniquely human.
Thank you. That's a wonderful ending. And as for ending, I just want all of us to take a moment and thank our wonderful speakers this evening. I've been inspired and heartened, and yay, humanities. So thank you, everyone. And again, we'll put this recording up and tell your friends because they'll likewise be inspired. Thank you, Robert Townsend. Thank you, Tim Henderson. And thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.